reminding me, I'm just going to record it. So if there is a problem and you don't want to be recorded, don't switch on your video. Okay, so we have, I think most people have come in. So I'm going to end the poll, but everyone's curious. I think most people are curious, excited, and happy. And some people are neutral, which is fine. And we had 63% who have returned from last week. That's great. That means we did a good job. So thank you for coming back. Well, this evening we have Bryna Tuft from the US Consulate General of Mumbai, who's here with us. I'm just going to mute everyone so that we can hear the speakers clearly and more people are joining us. If you've just joined in, please in the chat section, introduce yourself, your location and your organization so we know who you are. Okay, so as I said earlier, my name is Elsa Marie De Silva. I'm the founder and CEO of the Red Dot Foundation. I'm logging in from Mumbai, and I'm really thrilled to partner with the US Consulate General. Normally, we would do it at Dosti House in person, but this is an opportunity to do the same sessions online and connect with even more people who otherwise might not have been able to attend in person in Mumbai. So welcome everyone. And from the US Consulate General, we have Bryna Tuft, who is a Vice Consul currently working in Mumbai, of course. She has served in Shanghai and Beijing, as well as a short-term assignment in New Delhi. So she's no stranger to India. She holds a master's degree in classical Chinese and a doctorate in modern and contemporary Chinese literature and women's and gender studies. Prior to joining the Foreign Service, she worked as an adjunct professor of East Asian Studies and Women's and Gender Studies. So welcome, Bryna. Would you like to say a few words to our audience? You are on mute, so you might have to unmute yourself. And maybe I might also have to help you unmute.
Okay. I think I have now unmuted myself, right?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Lovely. Thank you, Elsa. Hello. Let me say hello to everyone. My name is Bryna Tuft. I'm a Vice Consul at the U.S. Consulate General in Mumbai, as Elsa Marie said. On behalf of the Consulate, I want to thank all of you for joining us today for a workshop on nonviolent communication. We also want to express our gratitude to our partner, Elsa Marie De Silva, and the team of Red Dot Foundation, and to our speaker, Rukmini Iyer, for joining us this evening. Earlier this year, the pandemic struck hard and fast and has created a stressful situation of protracted uncertainty, both financially as well as health-wise. All over the world, most people are in some state of lockdown with family, friends, roommates, or alone. Most of us are struggling hard to maintain a balance in our work and personal lives. We have to bear in mind that all are going through the same situation and trying hard to deal with feelings of isolation, mood swings, depression, anxiety, and other emotional stresses. These crises bring to our attention our interconnectedness, interrelatedness, and our interdependence. We're all under so much stress, which means much of the time we may not be at our best. In such situations, it can be hard to know the right thing to say right now. Our quality of life depends on the quality of our communication, as this will affect our relationships and ourselves. We have to understand that effective communication is a learned skill. It will help us if we give others the benefit of doubt, be more forgiving and accommodating in our behavior. These are tough times, but we can practice mindfulness and nonviolent communication strategies to attune our capacity for cooperation in this new reality. I look forward to listening to the speaker to shed some light on the best practices to deal with such situations. Before we get started, I would like to share information on our American space in Mumbai. Dosti House is the place to learn, collaborate, and engage on issues important to the United States and India relationship. We have a lot of print and online resources which members can use for research and reading. At Dosti House, we conduct in-person and virtual programs on important areas such as women's empowerment, STEM education, gender issues, human rights, Education USA, and the English language. This program is one such initiative. You're welcome to visit once things stabilize and Dosti House opens its doors for you to visit and use our resources. Thank you again, and please join me in welcoming, let me give it back to you, Elsa Marie. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenna. And I want to say that, this is the second in a series of 4 workshops that we are doing as part of social distancing, changing the way we work in the future. And this idea came from the US consulate and the team led by Sabina Mirchandani. So I want to thank them as well for being so perceptive that we, should be talking about this and creating a space so that we can learn new skills and also share ideas. And last week we had work from home best practices where we had 4 corporate executives share what they were doing in their companies, and the companies were all very, very different. Today we have nonviolent communications, and initially everyone asked like, but why? So, tempers are flaring because we are all cooped up at home. We are, many of us are depressed. Many of us are struggling to cope. And, people who are around us might bear the brunt of some of these emotions and this charged atmosphere that we are operating within. So it's not doing us any good, nor is it doing the people around us, or maybe even the people at work. Because I don't know about you, but for the last 7 months, I've only stepped out for a social interaction about twice. So that's not normal by any standards. And to constantly be online can play a lot on your mind. So that's why we had this session planned. And then on 20th October, we have Building Resiliency in Mind and Body, where we are going to have 2 different people show us very simple ways to stay fit, stay healthy, and engage in mindfulness. So we have Dimple Sofa, who will show us a few exercises that you can do seated on your chair, and that can relieve some of the stress. And we have Supreet K. Singh from our own team, who's a yoga acharya, and she will guide us through some meditation and some breathing and yoga asanas that you can do, which are not very difficult. And then the last one in November is with Napinai, who's a Supreme Court advocate, and myself, where we will walk you all through, the best practices when, not the best practices, but understanding the Prevention of Sexual Harassment at the Workplace Act, which is now, your workplace is in a virtual space. So how does that translate? And if you're HR professionals, how do you, deal with such issues if and when they occur? So without further ado, I want to introduce Rukmini Iyer. She's a dear friend of mine. She's the founder and CEO of Exult Solutions. She's also a Rotary Peace Fellow. And she's a seasoned leadership development facilitator, coach, and peace builder with over 19 years of professional experience around the world. Welcome, Rukmini, and over to you.
Thank you, Elsa, and hi, everyone. And thanks to the Red Dot Foundation and to the US Consulate for this opportunity to bring NVC, which is a value, a philosophy that's very close to my heart. I'm really glad to be able to have a platform to share this further. We have just about 75 minutes to do this, and therefore my focus is going to be on sharing the core practice of NVC, which is a 4-step process. So that's what we will attempt to work with in this session. And of course, having said that, I've been practicing NVC for close to a decade now, and it grows on you. That's something that I can say. When I first encountered it, It was intriguing and it felt extremely challenging. It still continues to challenge me at times, particularly when things are sensitive. Maybe if you look at the kind of things that are happening in the country right now, in India, for example, it is challenging to be non-violent in my communication. And when I say non-violent, I don't mean non-violent in the sense of, let's say, not using swear words or, managing my tone. We express violence in very, very, very many different ways. And one of my discoveries when I started practicing NVC was around how violent I was. That was a very strange experience, given that I would normally think of myself, and I think most people around me thought of me as someone who's fairly peaceful and calm. And NVC made me realize that's not quite the case. And so the first encounter and experience with NVC was really about encountering my own violence in terms of my thoughts, in terms of my emotions, which would eventually slip into my language. And the journey has really been about staying with that violence and then to look at how do I transform it? How do I look at the value beneath that violence? What is the need and the care beneath that violence, which can be tapped into, and which then becomes a huge reservoir of strength and energy. And that's what I'm going to attempt to share in the short time that we have today. I do hope to have at least a little bit of time for practice in breakout groups. Let's see how the conversation goes as we go along. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. So there are several, while NVC largely evolved as a modality for dialogue, as a modality for communication in the context of interpersonal communication, like us communicating with friends or family or at our workplace. It's also something that as peace builders, I know people like Elsa and me often use this in the context of dialogue and peace education in socio-political contexts as well. So there are varied applications of NVC, and you will find groups that work on different contexts, for example, in terms of NVC and compassion, NVC and spirituality, NVC and gender, NVC and education, and so on. So you will find a lot of special interest groups if you look up online. So if the concept intrigues you, I do encourage you to look up at these special interest groups online and engage in the conversation. I invite us to start with a really short centering practice, and it's a really simple practice that I invite you to do, which is just to connect with your body wherever you are, in whatever manner you're seated or resting, or I hope none of us are standing, but if that's the case, then so be it. I invite us to connect with our bodies. Simply notice the way it is right now. If you are seated, if you have something supporting you, notice what's supporting you. Notice the seat, perhaps your backrest, and simply notice the sensations in the body. It may be comfortable, uncomfortable, whatever it is okay. We don't need to attempt to change anything. Let's just notice how our bodies are. For example, I notice that I have my feet on the floor, touching the floor. I'm seated on a comfortable chair. I can feel the backrest supporting me really well. And I notice my body feels comfortably warm. There's a slight bit of pain on my knee, and the rest of the body feels comfortable. and I'm not attempting to change anything. It's just a moment of connection with the body that houses me. If you're comfortable as you stay connected with your body, I invite you to close your eyes. If your environment permits and if you feel safe closing your eyes, and listen to the words that I read. It's a poem called Unconditional by Jennifer Wellwood, and here it goes. Willing to experience aloneness, I discover connection everywhere. Turning to face my fear, I meet the warrior who lives within. Opening to my loss, I gain the embrace of the universe. Surrendering into emptiness, I find fullness without end. Each condition I flee from pursues me. Each condition I welcome transforms me and becomes itself transformed into its radiant, jewel-like essence. I bow to the one who has made it so, who has crafted this master game. To play it is purest delight, to honor its form, true devotion. That's Unconditional by Jennifer Wellwood. And with that invocation, I welcome us into the space, into the little more than an hour that we have together. Practice, and I invite us to, of course, stay in connection and stay in dialogue. I will, of course, leave my contact details should you wish to explore this further. And as we continue, you're, of course, welcome to make notes if you like around any insights that you might have during the process. I will, of course, also share the notes with you before we end this meeting today. So in case you're not in a position to make notes, just want to let you know that you will have the notes from here. So as we go forward, I do want to credit Marshall Rosenberg, who expounded the idea of nonviolent communication back in the 1960s. And the book that you see on the screen is something that I would recommend to anybody and everybody who can read, simply because it speaks of what the subtitle says, the language of life. It's about the language of connection, finding connection within ourselves and finding connection with people and systems around us. And it's a simple, hugely inspiring piece of work. So that's something I would encourage you to look up if you've not read it already. I know some of us in the audience perhaps are conversant with NVC in some form. And so some of what I share here might feel like a reinforcement of what you all space for all of us to be able to work through this together. A couple of requests that I have as we go forward is that for all practical purposes, we are a group of strangers from around the world connecting virtually. And whilst I'm grateful for the technology that makes this possible, we do want to ensure that this is a safe and a useful experience for everyone that is here. And therefore, my requests to all of you would be to hold up respect, to respect yourself, your own emotions and your experience that comes up, and also hold up that respect for the experiences and the narratives of others that may perhaps share some of what they're feeling here. If we do have the opportunity for vocal sharing, or if you do go into breakout rooms and you get to speak with each other, I request you to be brief so that everyone has a fairly equal amount of time to be able to share should they wish to. And of course, the last request is of confidentiality. Whatever is shared within this room stays in this room. And so those are a few requests that I'd like for us to remember and to hold up for each other so that the shared space is safe for everyone who's here. So what is nonviolent communication? I thought this video in many ways explains what NVC is not. And in that sense, it defines it really well. I'm sure some of us have seen this. It's a really viral video, but I'd like to play at least about a minute of it for us to get a hang of what I'm trying to say here.
Listen to me. Like I do this all the time. And if I go out at the house or the door, Matthew has his toys, and then Matthew has all his toys.
Okay, but I have to yell at you guys.
Okay, Linda, listen, Linda, listen.
Okay, what?
Like everything they do at this house, you can't trust everything at Grandma's house.
Okay.
Okay, then what?
Then you're not listening to me.
Then you're not listening to me.
I asked you not to do something.
Linda, but listen to me. Look at, if we do something, if you get that bird thing off, you're gonna break it.
Okay, but I'm letting you know
But
that you cannot.
Linda,
No,
lick it.
You're not listening to me.
Linda,
Listen to me now. Listen to me now.
Listen to me.
No, you're not listening. I said no cupcakes, and you try to get cupcakes, and you try to ask Grandma.
Linda,
Didn't you?
Linda, lick it. If we do something without this, if we get close, you can't even get them. You're gonna burn your butt.
What's gonna burn your butt? You and Kevin don't listen, so I have to give both of you guys pop-pows in your butt.
But Linda, Grandpa's gonna give you peppers in the butt.
No, he's not.
Yeah.
I have to. You don't want me to hit Kevin, or you don't want me to spank you?
No.
Why?
Because anybody wants to spank me.
Then I have to spank Kevin.
But he's my little pop-box.
He's your little pop-ups, but he doesn't listen.
But Linda, honey, look at this. Right now, they can't do anything if we can't get everything out of the wall. If we're gonna break everything down.
Okay, I think that explains it really well. I'm going to pause there for a while and I can't really see the chat while sharing the screen, but what does that video convey to us about what NVC is not? If we can have some responses maybe on the chat, what kind of communication did you see happening in the video? Talking over each other. Thanks, Elsa. Yes, see some messages around, yeah, no one's listening, not letting the other person speak, directing the child that's not listening, no active listening, repetition, one-way dialogue, lack of listening, non-agreement. Okay, thank you. And yeah, so there's a lot of communication that's happening there, right? Both of them are speaking a lot, and yet no one's really getting through to each other. And the first aspect of violence in that communication is around the lack of listening, that no one's holding space. The second aspect of it is in terms of trying to deliberately not allow the other person to speak, right? So there are multiple layers of violence if you really dissect what on the surface seems like a really cute dialogue. So when I first saw that video a few years ago, I remember thinking, you know, that's so sweet, and I would watch it over and over again and have a laugh over it. But yes, when you look at it deeper, it's a lot of our communication, particularly in workspaces, are like that. It's a lot of people talking over each other and trying to make their point, and in a really unconscious way, not allowing space for the other person's point of view to exist. And that's the violence in the process that we're talking about. We're not making an assumption that any of us are knowingly or deliberately violent people. What we're saying is that a lot of our violence is absolutely unconscious even to ourselves. We don't know that we're doing this. A lot of times we believe we're being as calm as we can be, we're being as peaceful as we can be when we communicate, but that's not how it quite lands to the other person. So the intent of our communication and the impact of it is very different quite often. And what NVC attempts to do is really to bridge this gap between the intent and the impact of communication. So let me go back. So NVC speaks about or uses the metaphors of these two animals, jackals and giraffes, in explaining what communication can be like. The metaphor of the jackal is used as a land animal that's quite fierce. It's competitive. It sometimes there are packs of jackals that even fight each other in the process of trying to get to their source of food. And so the inherent nature of the communication, when we say the style of the jackal, is that one judges another, criticizes, there's a lot of moralizing, accusing, making assumptions, judgments. That's the inherent nature of the jackal-like communication. So when we, in terms of NVC, when we say jackling out or jackling in, that's what we attempt to do. For example, if I'm jackling out and saying, my boss doesn't understand the kind of pressures I have at home when he keeps heaping work onto me, he doesn't know my living situation, right? That's me jackling out in judging what my boss does in terms of interacting with me at work. At the same time, sometimes I might use the jackling in an inward direction. If I'm jackling in, then the communication can be directed in a violent way towards me. For example, if I say, I'm unable to stand up for myself as a woman, I need to really tell my husband that I work as hard as he does, and therefore he needs to do his share of work around the house as well. Why am I unable to ask it? I think I'm really weak, right? And that's jackling in, where I'm being judgmental and being accusatory towards myself. Either way, jackling in or jackling out, it doesn't really leave room for compassion. It doesn't quite leave room for dialogue. There may be a lot of talking at each other or talking at myself, but it doesn't really leave room for listening, because in making judgments, in using adjectives in very simple terms, if I have to put it in terms of language, if I'm using adjectives towards towards another person or towards myself, then I'm really leaving little room for dialogue because the decision has been made. What NVC attempts to do is to move to the other end of the spectrum. And notice that we're talking of this as a spectrum. We're not talking of these as polarities and that one needs to constantly embrace one polarity and not the other. The human experience is about being able to navigate between the two and to know that given the kind of systems we've created, the kind of workplaces, the social systems, the familial systems we've created around us, it's very natural to be jackling in our communication because that's how we are educated. That's what we're conditioned towards. A lot of our education system, pretty much around the world, is about having an opinion, right? We're taught to debate, we're taught to take sides, we're taught to stand up for our views, which doesn't quite leave too much room for listening unless we really cultivate it as a conscious practice. And so if we do notice ourselves jackling in or jackling out, please do be compassionate to yourself about it because we're trained for it. And what we're attempting to do with NVC is to notice that that's not the only choice. We also have a choice to move and access the other end of the spectrum and work with the metaphor of the giraffe. The metaphor of the giraffe is chosen because, one, it's a tall animal. It's able to go above the ground level, look at things from a higher perspective and notice both points of view. That's one reason for that metaphor. The other reason for the metaphor is that amongst all land animals, the giraffe is said to have the largest heart, the largest physical heart. And NVC in many ways is about connecting with our heart, connecting with our compassion and speaking from there, and hence the metaphor of the giraffe. So what we're looking to do in shifting this language from jackling in or out to giraffing in or out is to move from competition to compassion, compassion for self to start with, and then eventually compassion for another. So what that entails is an inner shift in terms of moving from judgment to moving from opinions, from decisions, from accusations, to moving into curiosity, to saying, okay, what could this other person's reality possibly be? Or what could my own reality possibly be that I am behaving or communicating in the manner that I am? So for example, while jackling out, if I say that, you know, my boss absolutely lacks compassion, he doesn't understand that I have pressures as a woman and I need to deal with work from home differently than he does as a man, right? That's me jackling out about my boss. If I have to giraffe out about it, I would perhaps attempt to stay curious and to say, I notice that my boss doesn't quite ask me how I am before giving me work to do. And I'd really like for him to check in with me once in a while, just to know if I'm overwhelmed or what's happening at home. And I wonder what makes him not check in. I wonder if I could maybe ask him that, just to go up one day and say, boss, do you feel like ever asking me what's my reality at home? And that really opens up the possibility for dialogue. And of course, I'm not saying it's easy, right? It's our trained response is to jackal out. And yet relationships shift, and take my word for it. I've seen massive shifts in my own personal relationships with clients that I've coached on NVC, with dialogues where we've had intense conversations between Israelis and Palestinians, and where one moment of giraffing completely shifts the tone and completely changes the possibilities that the conversation can bring about. So that's the attempt we are looking to do here when we are looking to shift from jackling to giraffing. And of course, like the example I gave about jackling out and giraffing out, the same process, of course, applies within. So if I'm jackling out and saying, you know, I'm being stupid, I don't know how to organize myself, and therefore I'm getting overwhelmed with this whole work from home situation, that's a lot of self-judgment, right? I'm talking about me being stupid, me not having organizational skills, me lacking things, me not being enough. If I'm able to move to staying curious about myself, to say, okay, I am feeling overwhelmed, I feel disorganized, that there's a pile of work that I need to catch up with. What is it that I really need in this moment? If I'm unable to catch up in spite of the fact that I know exactly what I need to do to catch up, I know I need organizational skills, I know I perhaps need to be more vocal about things. In spite of knowing it, if I'm not doing it, what is it that I really need? What kind of a pause could I possibly use? Maybe I need to go down for a 10-minute walk around the apartment block. Maybe I just need to shut myself in the bathroom for 5 minutes away from everyone else at home and breathe. Right? So it's also about extending that sense of curiosity and compassion for oneself. And in my personal experience, it's only when I really learned to jackal in that I was able to jackal out as well, to be able to give that, provide that to others as well. So that's the invitation in this process, to move from jackling to giraffing, and at the same time hold yourself with compassion if you see yourself going back to jackling. It's okay, and there's always a way back into being a giraffe. So what is the movement? What is the way to get into the giraffe zone? That's at the heart of our conversation today. Yeah, so here's the process that we're looking to follow. And this is a 4-step process that's at the heart of NVC. It's often referred to by practitioners as the OFNR process. So if you hear NVC practitioners saying they're doing OFNR, here's what it means. O stands for observations, which is, in my opinion, the most crucial part of the process, in the sense that if you're able to move into a space of observation around your experience, then the rest of the steps are much easier, and you tend to organically emerge. So the first step is observation, then we move into feelings, and then we move into the needs that underlie the feelings, and then we go into requests, right? And the language of requests is another name that you often find being used for NVC. So we're going to get into detail in terms of how do we utilize these 4 steps, starting with observation. It's often the most challenging step, while it sounds like a simple term that we often use every day. Observation is about looking at and describing what is happening without my opinion, without my judgment, without my thoughts, without my blame. Simply describing things as they are. Right? So very often observational statements might start with something like I see, or I hear, or the situation is that, so and so. Of course, these are not the only options. That it's just some examples that can help you work with this. Let's spend a few minutes getting a hang of observations. Wherever you are, each of you, look at the environment, the room around you. And on the chat, if you could write one observation about the room that you are in, okay? Not an opinion, not a thought, not blame, not judgment, but one observation about the room you are in. If you could put that in the chat. Okay, it's dark, there's no light, clean. I feel that the room is chilly, brightly lit, colorful. Room is rectangle, white walls, L-shaped, safe, fresh, full of memories. Hear birds chirping, sunlight streaming in. Observation about, Asmita, what we're talking about is, can you share an observation about the room you are in? Something that you know is an observation and not a judgment, not a thought. Okay, someone says breezy, room has one red wall, 3 beige, it's blue, 3 lamps. Okay, some good observations coming in, positive vibrations, full of stuff, t-shirt on the bed, well lit. Okay, so I'm glad there are quite a few great examples of what an observation is. What an observation is not is my subjective experience of it. So for example, if I say that the room has a positive vibe, that's my experience of it, right? And someone else might walk in and say, oh, such a dreary room, right? And both of our experiences are equally valid, right? So that's subjective, that's personal experience, and that's not quite an observation, right? There's an interesting one there that says little messy with lots of books around. Lots of books, yes, the books being there is an observation, right? Messy is my opinion of it. And somebody else may think lots of books around makes it cozy, right? And that's equally valid as an experience. So what we are attempting to say here is that an observation is something that cannot be contested. If there were a camera installed in the room, what would the camera see, right? The camera would see the books. The camera would not have a judgment about the fact that it's messy with the books around, right? Or the camera would see that there's, let's say, light in the room, that there are plants in the room, that's something that a camera would see. The camera would not determine that that makes the room have a positive vibe, right? So one clue to changing our statement from our thoughts or opinions into observation is to think about how would a camera phrase it. If a camera could talk, how would a camera phrase the reality of the situation, right? So let's take this one notch up. Think about a person that you have a conflict with. Let's say your partner or a spouse at home, maybe a colleague that you're having a difficult conversation with, someone that you don't get along with. Think of that person, okay? And let's attempt to, of course, without disclosing who the person is or naming anyone, let's attempt to draft an observation about that person. An observation, not an opinion. Let's try this. Someone says old. Okay, old can be rather subjective, but yeah. Fair, wears a sari, short hair. Okay, that's an observation. The person's tall. Heartless, interesting, is 78 years old. That's an observation. Does not let others speak. Okay. Talkative, has white hair, frowns frequently, egoistic, knowledgeable, always properly dressed, shaven head, keeps giving unnecessary suggestions, holds degree from a known university, creative thinker, tall, speaks slowly, stays silent most of the time, avoids eye contact while talking, wears spectacles, right? Self-indulgent, always in a rush. Okay. So we've got, again, a great mix of observations and some not quite observations. Okay. So some things that can be verified and are, in a way, can't be contested are things like this person is 78 years old, right? That's what it is. Or the person has white hair, or the person is tall. Well, tall is subjective, but yes, I mean, it's you can figure when a person is tall or short in a cultural context, right? Or a person speaks a certain language, or a person holds a certain degree. All of these are observations, right? There are some which are not quite observations. For example, self-indulgent, egoistic, talkative. All of these are our experiences and our opinions of them, right? If I may think that someone is talkative, and that person may have an entirely different opinion of themselves, right? Or they may behave in completely differently in another environment. Maybe with me they're talkative, but with other people they may go completely silent, right? So that's my subjective experience, and that makes it my opinion, right? Also, a lot of times when we, there are some phrases which are interesting to notice in that it's on the face of it, it looks like their observations. For example, there's a statement that says she does not let others speak or is properly dressed always. Now, when we make these statements, yes, on the face of it, it looks like it's observable, right? Does not let others speak. However, do I know that in every moment, in every space of their life, they don't let others speak? No, not quite. It's only in my interactions with them, right? So then when I make it an always or a never statement, it's not an observation. That's another clue to get a hang of what an observation is. If I'm saying, if I'm making a statement about someone and I'm likely to tag it with always or never, then it's quite likely not an observation, right? Because it's only in my experience with them that they seem to be like that, but others may have an entirely different reality, right? And the reason we're spending a little more time on observation is because this is crucial. A lot of times we close the door to dialogue and conflict resolution because we present opinions instead of observations. And the moment we've presented an opinion or a judgment, the decision is made, right? When I go into a dialogue thinking, okay, I want to make this request of my boss, but I know he's a dud and he's rude and he's not going to listen to me. If that's the mental space with which I'm going into the dialogue, then I've already made my decision around the fact that he's not going to listen. So even if the person's going to listen, I'm not open to it. I'm not open to being received there, right? And therefore, it becomes important to shift oneself internally into a space of curiosity. No matter how difficult and challenging my experience with that person is, and particularly for people at home that we're living with day in and day out, it is really difficult to get into a space of curiosity because we believe we know them in and out. And yet, it's often people that we believe we are very close to, our innermost circle, because we lack curiosity about them, we end up missing a huge part of who they really are and what their reality is. A lot of the depression around the world today is really about that, about the fact that we're not able to hold curiosity for those that are in our innermost spaces. And when there's that lack of curiosity, the experience that one might have is of absolute disconnection. And that doesn't do any good for our mental health or of anyone else around us. And So in many ways, NVC is a huge healing process in terms of not just interpersonal relationships, but also in terms of social and emotional health. So yeah, there's a lot of value in the process if you're able to invest some energy in really moving to a space of curiosity, no matter how difficult our experiences. If you're able to move to that one moment of observation to say, okay, today in my conversation with this person, instead of saying that, okay, he or she is self-indulgent, if I'm able to say, today in my conversation with this person, they did not ask any questions about me. They spoke about themselves. If I'm able to rephrase that, right, instead of saying they're self-indulgent, if I'm able to say, today they did not ask about me, they spoke about themselves, it contextualizes the conversation. It says, okay, this happened today. Can I stay open to another experience tomorrow, maybe? And that shifts the energy, that shifts the tone, that shifts the body language when I approach them next. And initially, I used to be intrigued when I first heard Marshall Rosenberg say this. But he believed hugely in the statement that says, it takes only one giraffe to shift the conversation. The other does not have to know NVC. The other does not have to know that you're engaging in the process. The other can do all the jackling they want. It takes one giraffe to shift the tone of the conversation and the possibilities in it. And initially I thought, okay, sounds philosophical, too good to be true. But over the years, I've noticed and experienced what he means by it takes only one giraffe. So my invitation would be for you to try it out, and it does work. All right, so that's about what an observation is. I'm going to go back to the slides and talk about the other three pieces. So as we said, it's a 4-step process. The first step is observation, then we have feelings, needs, and requests. So we looked at what observations are. Feelings are, I suppose, easier in one way, but not quite in terms of us being able to express feelings. Right? A lot of times the challenge with feeling is that we do feel, but we don't quite have a vocabulary of feelings. We don't quite know how to express the feeling, right? So do I know, for example, if I say I'm angry, right? Anger is a broad term, right? Do I know if I'm enraged, if I'm annoyed, if I'm upset, if I'm mildly irritated? What's the tone, what's the flavor of anger that I have, right? So the work that we need to put in terms of getting to feeling and getting to express our feeling is about, can we name it correctly? And can we name it in an uninhibited manner? Right? A lot of times we're conditioned to believe that there are some feelings that aren't quite good, that are so-called negative, right? So it's sometimes difficult to say to another that, you know what, I'm jealous of you. Or, you know, I'm feeling guilty about doing something, or I'm feeling ashamed about messing this up. Right? That there's a lot of sometimes shame and taboo around expressing feelings clearly. And yet it's so liberating when we are able to do it, because the kind of connection that expressing a feeling invokes is huge. It really connects the human in us to the human in another, no matter what sides we are on. And that makes all the difference to the rest of the process. So my request here would be to really attempt to name your feelings as accurately as you can. Right? So for example, if I have to prepare to have a conversation with my boss, if I'm able to convert firstly my thoughts and opinions into my observation and say, for example, that, okay, I notice my boss giving me a lot of work without quite asking me how I'm doing and how I'm coping with what he's already given to me. And I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm also feeling a little annoyed. There are moments when I feel angry with him for him not asking me about how I'm doing. Right? So I'm naming these for myself in preparation for the conversation. And then if I'm able to go down from feeling into need, I don't want to go too much into the theory behind it, but that there is a neurobiological process here. But what we are saying is that feelings at the end of the day are a neurochemical reaction, right? That there's a hormonal response created due to certain experiences that we have. And those hormonal responses are what we experience as feelings. And those hormonal responses happen because there's something much deeper in our, what's termed the reptilian brain, the brain stem. There are needs that reside there, and these are needs that are common across humanity. Marshall calls them universal human needs because they range across gender, age, race, ethnicity, all of that. All of us have exactly the same needs as human beings. And all needs are valid. What is often unpleasant and in a way invalid is the strategy that we use to meet the need, but the need itself is valid. Okay? So for example, I may have a need for, all of us, for example, have a need for love, for belonging, for respect, affiliation, safety, trust, need for acknowledgement for the fact that I exist, right? Or validation, approval. All of these are needs that all of us experience. And when needs are fulfilled, then the feelings that arise out of those needs are often what we term as positive feelings. Right? So for example, if I feel acknowledged, if my needs of appreciation, acknowledgement, safety are met, then I'm likely to feel happy, I'm likely to feel engaged in my workspace, I'm likely to feel affectionate towards people at home, right? Because there are needs that are met. When there are needs that are unmet, then the feelings become so-called negative, right? When I feel like I'm not, when my need to be appreciated is not met, or when my need for respect is not met, or acknowledgement is not met, then I feel irritated, angry, upset, sad, depressed, all of that, right? And of course, it's not a formula that a certain need gives rise to a certain feeling. It's possible that needs and feelings may manifest very differently in different people, right? So there's really no right or wrong feeling or need, okay? So there's feelings, and then there's need, which is a deeper layer. And so if we have to continue the conversation, so if I have to continue with the example of the conversation with my boss, I might go up to boss and say, hey boss, I've noticed that you've been passing on work to me in the last couple of weeks without quite checking in, how I'm doing in terms of the work that I've already been allocated. And that's making me feel upset because my need for rest is not met. My need for my need for acknowledgement is not met. Right? So that's one way to start having that conversation. And then, of course, finally come to the stage of a request, right? This is, in a way, if I have to put it in terms of input and output, the request is the output of the NVC conversation. So a request is where I express my observation, my feeling, and my need, and then place a request to another. And the request could be of different things, right? The request could be for me to say, okay, I've shared my reality around this. Would you like to talk about your reality, right? So for example, I've told you, boss, that, here's how I feel about you giving me more and more work. May I ask you what's happening with you? What's making you keep giving me work without checking in on me? Right? That could be one form of a request where I'm checking in on another person's reality. Or maybe I have a request that's got to do with me, not to do with the other person. Right? Now, the term request can be a little confusing, so I want to clarify here. Request is not about simply making the language polite. It's not simply about using the word please or request. We're talking about the energy of request, right? So what the energy of request is that firstly, it's a three-step process. That the first request is always for connection. Connection simply means, is that person willing to talk about this right now? Right? So it's about, for example, going up to boss and say, hey, you know what, I want to talk about how can we manage the situation at work differently. Do you have time to talk about it right now? That's a connection request. And the person may say, no, this is not a good time. Let's have a call later. And that's perfectly okay. The request can continue later. Right? So the first step is always a connection request, because if we go straight into an action request, which is the third step, in a way we're being violent, because we're not quite taking into account the other person's reality. Maybe the person's not in a frame of mind to be able to talk. Maybe the person's occupied elsewhere. Right? So if we make assumptions around the other person's time, that's also a form of emotional violence, right? So the first step is always a connection request, is to check in, are you okay to talk about this right now? The next step is a request for understanding, right? Which is to present my point of view and maybe also request for another's point of view. So a request for understanding could be something like, so you've been, so we've presented the O, F, and N, the observation, feeling, and need. So to say that, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling angry that you're giving me all of this work, and my need for rest is not met, my need for acknowledgement is not met. Are you willing to understand my situation at home? Can I tell you a little bit about what's happening at home before we discuss this further? Right? That's a request for understanding, where I want to present a little bit more about my reality, and maybe also invite the other person to present their reality as well, what's happening with them. And then finally, the action request, where it's about saying, the next time you want to give me some work, would it be okay for you to give me a little more notice, or maybe negotiate for time with me without making a commitment to a client? So there's a specific action that I'm asking for. What often happens is, in the natural course of our conversation, we tend to go directly into action requests. And we think we're being polite. And from a language perspective, we really are being polite. But the violence in the communication, the inherent jackling slips in because we've not made a connection and understanding request. So we've perhaps made an action request of a person in a space where they're not ready to receive a request at all. Right? Maybe they're in the wrong, maybe you've reached them in the wrong time zone, or maybe they're in a different meeting, or they're occupied mentally or emotionally elsewhere. So it's really important to follow these three steps when you make a request. First, connect, then present your side of your experience, invite their experience if possible, and then move into action request. And we've been speaking about the energy of requests, and the energy of requests needs for us to be able to receive a no. So it's possible that in spite of all of this effort that I make, my boss might say, I'm sorry, the situation is critical. I have no one else to go to, so I'm going to continue piling up work for you. Right? And so it is. And yet, because you've established a bridge this time, it's possible that when the situation changes even slightly, the person might the next time around pause a little bit, ask if you need things to be done differently. You're opening up a door. It's like a foot in the door, and then the relationship eventually shifts. So be prepared to receive a no. A request is just that, a request. It's not a demand, right? So the other person has the right to not understand, right? So what the shift that we're looking to do, the energetic shift that we're looking to do in the process of nonviolent communication is really the shift from the head, which is thoughts, opinions, blame, to the heart, where we're going down to feelings and to needs, and to the gut, where we're going down to request, to really connect with the other as a human being, to present my unmet needs as a human outside of my role, outside of my gender, outside of my race, right? The fact that I have a need which you will identify with because you're human and you do have that need, right? And that's the level of connection we attempt to establish in the process of nonviolent communication. So I noticed we've got about 20 minutes to go. I would have liked some practice, but let me check in with the room what the best use of our time would be. I'm happy to use the time for Q&A, or we could do a short practice in the breakout groups. I'm open to it either way. If you have a strong preference for one or the other, if you could quickly put into the chat, we could decide accordingly. Nusha says Q&A. Let's wait to hear from a few more. Says Q&A. Okay, there's one person that says breakout. There are 4 voices so far that say Q&A.
I think Rukmini, let's do a Q&A because
Okay.
maybe we can host another session in the future, which will be a more practical one.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do that. So maybe about 15 odd minutes of Q&A, and then we'll give Brian and Elsa some time to wrap things up as well. So yeah, let's have the questions. If you prefer to type it into the chat, you can do that, or else if you want to speak, you can raise your hand in the participants tab, and then we can take questions from there as well.
So I have a question, Rukmini. So now we've done this and we obviously have learned some new skills. And so in the recent past, if we have a conversation that didn't go quite well, and we know now, we were judgmental and we were jackaling out. So now how can we course correct?
Okay. Would you want to, when you say course correct, would you want to reach back to this person? Or are you looking at just internal course correct?
Yeah, no. So one is obviously, it's your inner thoughts about that person that has caused you to say or frame the way you put your thoughts across to that person. And now, say, for example, we've gone through what you've shown us, and now, you know that you could have done better, right?
Yeah.
So now I want to reach out to this person again.
Yeah.
And I got a little pushback, obviously. It wasn't really drastic, but there was a little pushback to say, but that's my point of view. So how do you now take this conversation forward without, you have to acknowledge. So one is acknowledging why you said what you said, that maybe it was overwhelming for you. And that person was probably contributing to your being overwhelmed. But now that the pushback has come, maybe there's some understanding as to how that person was seeing the situation. So now how can you, like giraffe, and make sure that you have the best working relationship, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. And that's a great context for practical application of NVC also. So thanks for that question. I'm sure a lot of us would resonate with that. Before I answer that, I've put in a couple of files on the chat. One is, of course, notes based on the PPT I shared, and the other is a vocabulary of feelings and needs. That's something I find useful. Sometimes you're stuck for words in terms of how I feel or what I need, so that's something that can be useful. So feel free to download that if you like. And coming back to your question, Elsa, it's a lot of times what I've done in situations like the one you've described is firstly go through the 4-step process myself in terms of how did the previous conversation go, right? And really try and convert the interaction into an observation, in terms of saying that, okay, we had a meeting on this particular day, and I said this, and this other person said this, and at the end of the day, the result of that interaction was that something happened or did not happen, as the case may be. And when I think about how that interaction went, now I feel remorse, right? And that's my feeling. You might feel completely differently around it. So I might feel remorse. I might feel upset about how things happened, because my need for resolution was not met, or my need for appreciation was not met, or my need for understanding was not met. Now that I have a clearer view, having stepped back from the situation, can I now reach back to the person and exactly say what I said in so many words, in terms of, firstly, of course, starting with a connection request, asking the person, can we talk about our last interaction? Can we talk about what happened in the last meeting? Right? And then presenting that in these steps, the O, F, N, and eventually R. So saying that the way I observed the meeting, this is what I said, this is what you said, this was the result. At the end of it, I was left feeling regretful, remorseful, whatever my feeling was. And here is what I'm needing right now. And then moving on to a request for understanding, to say, would you like to present your point of view, or would you like to hear more about my own experience about the meeting and what I think is the way forward? And in my experience, the moment we are willing to be vulnerable enough to name a need, it somehow magically opens up a doorway for connection. Because just the fact that we are willing to take that step to talk about our feelings, name our feelings and our needs, and make that effort, shifts something in the other person, no matter how difficult they may be otherwise. It shifts something in them, and even if they're unwilling to share or name their own feelings and needs, they're at least willing to listen and to reconsider their position. And once that dialogue is opened up, then of course we can go back and forth on the requests in terms of what you might need from them, or what they may need, for you to do differently. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Savita says mixing observations with feelings creates problems. How about learn from experience? We can try that with strangers. Yeah. Yes, Savita, that's an interesting question you've put up, that it's often with people that we're distant from in some way, it's easier in the sense one can go back and name things more objectively. It's more difficult with people that we interact with very regularly, people that we're close to, uh, simply because the element of curiosity is missing. Right? Simply because I assume that I know them, or this is how they are, right? And no matter how positive that word that I use for them can be, it's still a judgment, right? Even if I hold let's say, even if I describe something and say, oh, you know what, my father is the most compassionate man in the world, right? It's still a judgment. It's my opinion, right? And somebody else, my mom might have an entirely different opinion of him, right? So am I open to another reality? Am I open to the fact that somebody else might experience them a little differently than I do? And therefore, can I be curious about their experience? And it's possible that it's a momentary experience, right? It may not be an overarching thing, but it's possible that there could be a momentary experience which completely contradicts my belief of another person. But can I stay curious for just that moment? Because that opens up the doorway to connection. As you say, Savita, it is difficult, but well, all I can say, it's worth the effort. It's worth the effort of moving to the giraffe side of the spectrum, even for a moment, because the simply the possibilities that emerge are beautiful there. Shipriya says, how do we balance boundary setting with OFNR while parenting? That's an interesting one, and it'll probably be a 3-hour answer, Shipriya. So I don't want to get completely into it, but in working with children, something that I've noticed is that they seem to intuitively understand the language of needs. Very often when they are told that I care for your safety, right? Keeping you safe is my need, and safety is also your need as a child, no matter how old you are. It's important for you to be responsible for your physical, mental, emotional safety. And so that we uphold safety for each other, there are going to be some rules, there are going to be some boundaries around things you can and cannot do. And therefore, are you willing to listen to why these boundaries exist? Right? So if I say that, no television after this time, or you can't access an iPad or today, or whatever the boundary is, if I'm able to communicate the need behind those boundaries, I find that they often understand. Very often as children, they come back to renegotiate. Okay, but it's not that once they've understood it, it's done. They'll often come back to negotiate. Sometimes they come back to negotiate in the next 20 minutes, but they do understand. And the more it's reinforced, the more they are also able to get a sense of their own boundaries and what's okay and what's not okay. So yeah, I would encourage you to try speaking about needs with children. Anusha says, while observing and giraffing yourself and others, how do we potentially avoid enabling destructive behavior? I'm not quite sure how to interpret destructive behavior, Anusha. Would you want to say more about it?
Yeah, sure. So I notice that often when I try to be compassionate and kind, at least to myself, that sometimes I tell myself that it's okay to do certain things, like it's okay to whatever, sleep for 12 hours, then eat an entire cake. But I find that often, how long can we do that for, before it becomes potentially not good for ourselves.
about is an interesting point in terms of us being able to learn to distinguish between needs and strategies. Okay, I may have a need for self-care, but if my strategy for self-care is to have the entire cake, the strategy doesn't quite work, right? So the danger is not so much in the need, the danger is in the strategy. So what we do need to be observant about again is that if I'm using a certain strategy to meet a need, to fulfill a need, what is potentially the consequence of it, right? And therefore, let's say if I want to unwind and that there's a need for rest, there's a need for rejuvenation, and my strategy happens to be to, let's say, down a few pegs of scotch, may not be the healthiest option, right? And therefore, I do need to weigh the consequences of how does the strategy impact me? Am I going to be a simple test that I often use to kind of check if my strategy is okay or not is, here is a need I want to fulfill. Tomorrow when I wake up, how am I going to feel about the strategy before I execute that strategy? And if I feel like maybe I'm going to wake up feeling guilty or not quite okay about the strategy, then I know that I need to find another way to meet the need. So that's a simple test that I tend to apply to myself. I hope that makes sense to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, and maybe we'll take one last question before I turn it back to Elsa.
Aparna has posted it twice. How to change people's perspective about your communication style, people who are close to you and you live with them.
So, Aparna, I'm assuming what you're trying to say here is that if you suddenly shift the way you communicate, it's possible that people might think you're being weird, or they might have judgments or might make fun of you at times. And yes, that's a very practical challenge. With some of my closest friends and even colleagues, I've gone for broke and told them, listen, I'm experimenting with this new way of communication called NVC, and therefore you might find me using a different kind of language or vocabulary, or you might find me communicating differently from what I usually do. And I request you to allow me space to do it. Right? And often if these are people that care for me, they do allow. Right? And even for those that may sometimes continue to make fun or take my effort lightly, when they see that I persist with it, at some point they adapt. So I don't, so for you to start practicing a different way of communication, it's not quite necessary to level with others or to have others agree with you necessarily. Sometimes just go for it where you can, and sometimes where you find reactions from people, explain it to them in so many words that I'm trying a different method, and allow me space for it. They, more often than not, I find that people do allow for space or eventually adapt. Either way it works. Yeah. All right, so that leaves us with 3 minutes to go. Thank you for the interaction and the engagement during the session. I really did wish we had some practice time, but yeah, 90 minutes can be a tight session. But thank you for engaging with this. I hope you've downloaded the notes I sent on the chat, and I will leave my contact details on the chat now, so that if you have questions, feel free to connect. So back to you, Elsa.
Thank you, Rukmini. I think this is now the third time I've attended your session, and it always helps me reconnect with the the practice. And it's really about incorporating this knowledge into your daily life, which is very, very difficult if you're not intentional about it. So thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure again going through this workshop with you. I can't thank you enough. So, so thanks. And Raina, would you like to, just share a few words, what you thought about the session and yeah.
Well, I thank you for letting me be a part of this. This was really interesting, and I have a lot, there's a lot of really good takeaways here to start thinking about. And I'm thrilled, that the U.S. consulate can be a part of these kinds of discussions. I would make one final little plug for Dosti House. If you're interested in seeing more events like this, you can find our information on the if you go to the U.S. Embassy's website in Delhi, it's in.usembassy.gov. You can look for the information about Dosti House. And thank you so much to Elsa and Rukmini for having this event.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, honestly, if it was not during COVID-19, this would be happening in Dosti House. And we've done many such sessions, which are practical, which are interactive, and it's so much more fun, but we have to adapt to the online version and we are getting good at it. It's not always equal to what would happen in the physical space, but nevertheless. So thank you once again for the partnership. I have launched the feedback poll, so if you can just take that. I will be sending out a final mail with all the links, the recording, and if you want to give us feedback as well, what kind of sessions y'all want us to host, because we are zoomed out with webinars, but things like this, which can improve your knowledge, increase your skills, also help you meet new people, would be amazing. So thank you all for coming, and we have another session on the 20th led by Supreet K. Singh and Dimple Sofa, and I'll send you more details about that too. I want to just ask Sabina. Sabina, do you want to say a few words?
I just want to thank you, Elsa, and thank Rukmini and Brianna, and for an excellent and very informative session. I just wish it was longer, like she said, but thank you so much, and thank you to the participants also for being such a good audience and very interactive. Thank you.
Maybe we can have an advanced session in the future so that you go back, apply these skills, and then come back for a refresher with a little more detail. What say, Rukmini?
Well, I'm totally game for that.
Okay, great. So thank you so much. If there are still some people left to take the poll, if you could just do that. 3 questions. Did you enjoy the session? Did you learn some new skills? And would you like to attend sessions like these in the future? That would be great. And we will continue to keep in touch with you over email. Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.